The echoes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major floated to the marble lobby of the towering glass skyscraper like a ghostly confession. It was after midnight, and the building, home to one of New York's most prestigious investment firms, was empty except for a janitor mopping the floor. No one ever noticed him during the day. To the executives, he was invisible, a man whose dark skin blended with the shadows of their indifference. But tonight, the melody that rose from the dusty grand piano in the corner told a story that none of them would believe. The janitor's fingers moved with elegance, not like those of a cleaner, but like those of a maestro who had lived 1,000 heartbreaks. Each note carried pain, loss, and resilience. The soft hum of the cleaning machine faded as the music took control of the silence. And then, unbeknownst to him, the CEO, Victoria Hallberg, stood just beyond the hallway. Her stilettos clicked faintly on the polished floor before she froze. She knew that piece. It was Chopin's work, complex, emotional, haunting. What she couldn't understand was how a janitor, someone she'd barely ever acknowledged, could play it like that. Earlier that morning, she had humiliated him in front of her entire staff for accidentally spilling coffee near her office. She'd told him, "Stick to what you know. Some people are meant to clean floors, not touch art." Now, as the final notes of Chopin's masterpiece dissolved into the empty air, Victoria's face turned pale. Her words echoed back at her, heavy with guilt and disbelief. The man she had mocked wasn't who she thought he was. The story that would unfold in the days to come would shake the entire company, rewriting not only her perception of him, but of herself. Because the janitor's story didn't begin with a mop in his hand. It began in a world far from this building, where he once stood on a stage surrounded by thunderous applause. And soon, everyone in that corporate tower would learn who he really was, and why his haunting performance of Chopin was the quietest, most powerful revenge anyone had ever witnessed. His name was Samuel Okoro, a 54-year-old Nigerian immigrant who had come to America 20 years ago with nothing but a suitcase and a photograph of his late mother. By day, he cleaned offices. By night, he lived in a small, dimly lit apartment in the Bronx, its walls adorned with old sheet music. To most people, Samuel was just another face in the sea of the working poor. Quiet, polite, efficient. He never complained, never argued, never missed a day of work. But behind that calm demeanor lay a life that once gleamed with brilliance, before tragedy and racism silenced him. Back in Lagos, Samuel had been one of Africa's most promising classical pianists. Born into poverty, he discovered an abandoned piano at a church when he was 12. With broken keys and cracked strings, he taught himself to play using fragments of Chopin's compositions he found in discarded music books. By 18, he was performing for ambassadors and dignitaries. By 25, he had won the Lagos International Piano Festival and earned a scholarship to study in Europe. But when he arrived in London, the world that claimed to celebrate talent revealed its other face. Despite his unmatched skill, Samuel found doors quietly closing around him. The conservatories praised his talent, but doubted his fit for the classical world. "You're gifted," one judge told him, "but people expect a certain look for Chopin, don't they?" That look wasn't his. Still, Samuel fought to belong. He played in small cafes, hotel lobbies, and bars, anywhere that had a piano. But years of rejection, financial hardship, and subtle racism eroded his spirit. When his mother died back home, and he couldn't afford the flight to attend her funeral, something inside him broke. He left London and moved to New York, thinking a fresh start might heal him. But dreams rarely survive the grind of survival. Without credentials or connections, he found work where he could, cleaning offices, polishing floors, living quietly in a country that barely noticed him. And yet, he never truly gave up his first love. Every night after his shift, Samuel would return home, pull the cover off his small electric keyboard, and play Chopin until dawn, not for fame or money, but for the memory of the boy who believed music could set him free. His co-workers never knew. To them, Samuel was just the janitor. But fate has a way of resurrecting hidden souls, and it often begins with a single moment when someone's mask slips just enough for the world to see the truth beneath. That moment came on a Friday morning. Victoria Hallberg, blonde, elegant, fiercely ambitious, was the CEO of Hallberg Capital, a billion-dollar firm known for its ruthless culture. She was brilliant, but entitled. To her, hierarchy defined worth, and worth was visible through wealth, power, and class. When she saw Samuel accidentally spill a few drops of coffee near her office door, she didn't see an accident. She saw incompetence. She called him out publicly, mocking his age and accent. "Maybe this kind of work is too much for you," she sneered. "Do you even understand the value of this place?" Samuel had simply bowed his head and cleaned up the spill. He said nothing, as if the words couldn't wound a man already covered in old scars. But that night, when everyone left and silence filled the marble lobby, he sat down at the firm's grand piano, a decorative piece no one ever played, and began to play the same Chopin piece his mother used to hum when life was cruel. And that's when Victoria walked in. Her disbelief would soon turn into an obsession, because what she heard that night wasn't just music. It was a story of survival. The next morning, Victoria arrived early. She found Samuel quietly vacuuming the hallway, as though nothing unusual had happened. But she couldn't shake the memory of his performance. Those haunting notes still echoed in her head. Did I imagine it? She thought. Could he really play like that? She didn't ask him directly. Pride held her tongue. Yet over the next week, she began staying later than usual, pretending to review files while secretly waiting for him to touch the piano again. Every night, she watched from the shadows as Samuel played with effortless grace. Sometimes Chopin, sometimes Beethoven. Each time, it felt as though he was playing through every injustice he'd ever endured. Victoria's curiosity deepened into shame. She began to question the culture she'd built, a place where kindness was weakness and status determined respect. One evening, her friend and partner, Michael, noticed her distraction. "You've been off lately," he remarked. "What's going on?" She hesitated before replying, "It's the janitor. I think he's a pianist." Michael laughed. "What, like plays the radio?" "No," she said softly, "like a concert pianist." Her words hung awkwardly in the air. It was absurd, even to her, yet the truth gnawed at her. Finally, unable to bear her curiosity, she approached Samuel one night as he was finishing his shift. Her tone was condescending, but tinged with disbelief. "I heard you play the piano last week," she said. "Where did you learn that?" Samuel simply smiled. "Long ago," he replied quietly. His calm unsettled her. There was no flattery, no fear, just dignity, the kind she couldn't buy. That night, she searched his name online. Nothing. But when she dug deeper, through archives of old African music competitions, she found something extraordinary. A young man named Samuel Okoro, winner of several European classical contests decades ago. A photograph showed a smiling, youthful pianist with the same eyes, same grace. Her world tilted. The next morning, she called him into her office. For the first time, she offered him a chair. "I know who you are," she said. Samuel looked puzzled, but said nothing. "You could have been someone great," she added. "What happened?" He took a long breath. "I was someone great," he said gently. "Then the world reminded me of my place." The silence that followed was heavy. Victoria didn't know what to say. She had built her empire on ambition. Yet in this quiet janitor stood a man who once had everything she claimed to admire, talent, passion, discipline, and lost it all not from failure, but from injustice. A week later, Hallberg Capital announced its annual gala, a grand evening of luxury, networking, and charity auctions. The theme that year was Music for Hope. Ironically, a renowned pianist had been invited to perform, but 2 days before the event, that pianist fell ill. Victoria made a decision that stunned everyone. She called Samuel into her office once again and said, "Would you play for us at the gala?" The room fell silent. Her assistants looked horrified. The idea of a janitor performing for their elite guests seemed absurd. Some even whispered, "This will embarrass us." But Victoria ignored them. Deep down, she knew this was her chance to make something right. Samuel hesitated, his eyes reflecting both pain and pride. Then, slowly, he nodded. "If you want me to play," he said, "I'll play Chopin." Victoria smiled faintly. "Then play Chopin," she whispered. The gala night arrived like a storm of glitter and arrogance. The ballroom gleamed under crystal chandeliers, filled with New York's elite, bankers, investors, and politicians. Champagne flowed, laughter echoed, and whispers of wealth danced across the air. When Victoria took the stage, she greeted her guests with the poise of a queen. Then, she announced something that drew gasps from the crowd. "Tonight's pianist," she said, "is someone whose story reminds us that greatness often hides where we least expect it. Please welcome Mr. Samuel Okoro." The applause was hesitant. Many looked confused. A janitor? Playing for them? Samuel walked onto the stage wearing a borrowed black suit and a quiet confidence. As he sat before the grand piano, the audience's chatter died away. Then his fingers touched the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the hall, gentle, fragile, and impossibly human. Every sound seemed to breathe his entire life story. The dusty church piano in Lagos, the cold nights in London, the silent tears in the Bronx. The melody rose and fell like confession. Each chord a wound reopened, each pause a prayer. The audience, initially skeptical, soon leaned forward in awe. By the time he reached the crescendo, there wasn't a sound in the room except the trembling breath of those witnessing something sacred. When the final note faded, silence stretched for a long, trembling second. Then thunderous applause erupted. People stood, tears glistening in their eyes. Victoria's heart pounded. For the first time in years, she felt something she couldn't buy: humility. As Samuel stood to bow, she stepped forward and whispered, "If you play Chopin, I'll marry you." The crowd laughed, thinking a playful remark, but for her, it was more than that. It was an apology disguised as admiration. Samuel smiled softly. "I've already played Chopin," he said under his breath. And with that, he walked off stage, leaving behind a room forever changed. The days following the gala transformed everything. News of the janitor pianist spread across the internet like wildfire. Clips from the event went viral, amassing millions of views. People were stunned by his story, how a man discarded by society had humbled a room full of power. Journalists flooded Hallberg Capital with interview requests. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know who Samuel Okoro was. Victoria arranged for him to have a formal meeting in her office, not as an employee, but as a guest. "I owe you an apology," she said, "for how I treated you, for how I built this company. You reminded me that dignity isn't tied to titles." Samuel nodded slowly. "It's easy to forget humanity when the world rewards arrogance," he replied. Over the next months, Victoria sponsored a foundation in Samuel's name, the Okoro Initiative for Arts and Quality, which provided scholarships to underprivileged black musicians pursuing classical music. But Samuel never sought fame. He still lived modestly, still cleaned when he wanted, still played when the world slept. For him, music was never about proving worth. It was about reclaiming it. One afternoon, Victoria found him again at the piano, playing the same Chopin Nocturne. She asked, "Why do you always return to this piece?" He smiled. "Because Chopin wrote it during heartbreak, and I play it to remember that even pain can create beauty." Months later, Samuel received an invitation to perform at the Lincoln Center, a tribute concert celebrating overlooked black composers. When he walked onto that grand stage, wearing the same simple smile, the crowd rose before he even touched the keys. Among them sat Victoria, tears in her eyes, knowing she had witnessed not a redemption, but a resurrection. As the music flowed through the hall, it carried more than melody. It carried forgiveness, pride, and the echo of a man who refused to let the world define him. When the final note faded, the audience rose again, not for a janitor, not for a pianist, but for a man who reminded them that greatness has no uniform, no color, and no limit. Because sometimes the people the world steps over are the ones who carry the songs that can heal it.